Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Louis Freeh. It's a pleasure to be here, particularly today with Rudy, and it is my honor and privilege to endorse him for the presidency of the United States of America. I'm very proud and very delighted to do that. We've known each other for over 25 years, and I have always respected and admired him. I have a great affection for him personally, but I also have tremendous professional respect for his leadership, his accountability, his integrity, his responsibility, and his innovation with respect to law enforcement. I was in law enforcement for most of my 26 years of public service. I came to New York City as a 25-year-old FBI agent, clearly the best job I ever had, and began to work immediately with the United States Attorney's Office here in the Southern District of New York, which I couldn't say when I was FBI director, but I can say now is the premier U.S. Attorney's Office in the United States. Watching Rudy come in as U.S. Attorney, having the privilege to serve under him, all of us in the office, some of my colleagues are here today, will tell you that he led from the front. He tried cases. He tried one of the major corruption cases here in New York City. He was a mentor, a teacher. He was a lawyer who you could go to with real questions about strategies and witnesses and trials. And the work that he did there, not just in the areas where I worked, which was organized crime and narcotics, but in public corruption, in economic crimes, really innovative cases when many, many decades before Sarbanes-Oxley, his leadership and his prosecutions did the kind of transparency and accountability in that industry, which is so vital to our country. With respect to public safety, when I got here in 1975, the crime problems in New York City were legendary. As we got into the 1980s and the narcotics, particularly the crack epidemic, engendered enormous public violence, it was almost an acronym at the time that New York City was ungovernable in terms of violent crime. Nothing could be done, we heard from many of our public officials. 2,000 homicides a year, 11,000 crimes per week, and although we had a 40,000 member police department, one of the best police departments in the world, they were not applying or delivering the kind of strategies that had to be put together. When Rudy became mayor, he walked into this ungovernable, quote-unquote, situation from people's point of view. And the real problem there was a fundamental problem of accountability and leadership. Everybody during the 80s said nothing could be done about New York. We read about these horrific murders and stories which tarnished the reputation of this great city around the world. And public officials, very senior public officials, said, well, there's nothing we can do. We need more help from Washington. We need more police officers. When really the issue was the leadership and accountability. So when Rudy put into place the CompStat program, it was a very simple formula. We can't manage what we can't measure. So let's make local commanders, individual precinct officers responsible for the crime in those districts. And if they were not meeting standards, if crime was not being reduced, if people weren't becoming safer and feeling safer, which is just as important, those commanders would be taken down at headquarters and would have to explain why they were not performing. And that was the accountability and the leadership that he brought. And that's just in the area of public safety. I just got back from a trip to Palermo, Italy, the 15-year anniversary of the assassination of a very good friend of both Rudy and I, Judge Falcone, who was the major anti-mafia prosecutor in Sicily, killed with his wife and a police escort 15 years ago. Rudy and Judge Falcone worked extremely close together, developing witnesses, developing strategy. The Maxi trial in Sicily, the Pizza Connection case here, really worked as well as it did because of their friendship and the trust. But the point is, his reputation and the affection that the Italian police officers have for him is equal to the affection and the respect that the New York City police officers have for him. To measure his success here, you can look at statistics, you can look at all the numbers, You can also talk to any taxi cab driver or a doorman in the city, and all the millions of tourists who come here who will tell you that New York City is now not just a great city as it's always been, but a safe city. And that's largely attributable, Rudy, to your leadership, your willingness to hold yourself accountable as well as other people, and to make sure that we were reducing crime. We were actually reducing crime and improving public safety and the perception of safety, which is critical to the success. So I am very delighted, very honored to be endorsing my friend for the presidency. I've never done this, by the way, before. I was in government for 28 years. I tried to stay out of politics as best I could. But this is really, for me, a privilege and an honor, because this is a person and a man of character and integrity and leadership. And again, I'm just talking this afternoon, as he will be, a little bit about the public safety issue. But this is a very multi-dimensional talent and a dedication, a notion of public service and integrity that this country sorely needs and will benefit by. So, Rudy, it's my honor to support you, and congratulations and good luck.
Thank you, Lord. Thank you very much. Thank you. This is, for me, this is a very, very emotional moment to have Louis' support and endorsement. Louis is one of the very, very best people that I've ever worked with, gotten to know, gosh, in every respect. I mean, he was one of the very, very best assistant U.S. attorneys in an office made up of just incredibly talented, enormously dedicated assistant U.S. attorneys. He's been in law enforcement all his life. There are probably few people that have the knowledge and experience that he has in dealing with organized crime, dealing with terrorism, from the street level as an FBI agent making very difficult and dangerous cases, to an assistant U.S. attorney prosecuting the longest trial, at least in the history of the Southern District of New York, and by far the most complicated, the Pizza Connection case. Louis gives me a lot of credit for that. He deserves most of the credit for it. He put together this remarkable team of FBI agents, New York City police officers, assistant U.S. attorneys, and I think they had, during the course of that trial, I think the team had 4 or 5 children, right? That's right. Isn't that right? Yeah. The case went on so long. I think it went on for 29 months, if I recall correctly, something like that, right? Yes. And you can't believe the kind of dedication and concentration in an era in which we have attention deficit disorder. Louis Freeh is a man who can concentrate. And his concentration led to the conviction of all of the major figures that were involved in this massive heroin distribution ring. It also played a very big role in hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of mafia figures in Italy going to jail. I remember going to Rome with Louis in the mid-'80s when we negotiated for the sharing of a particular major mafia figure who had become a witness. I knew then that Louis was exceptionally talented, a great lawyer, a person with keen powers of understanding, a terrific negotiator. Then, of course, he went on to be a United States judge, great distinction, and then FBI director, and a man who was really became so knowledgeable in the kind of terrorist threat that we face. So having his endorsement as a personal matter is enormously important to me, because he is a very, very good friend and somebody I admire. But also having his support and his advice in this campaign, which largely is going to focus on what we have to do about terrorism, is invaluable. So thank you very, very much, Louis. Louis mentioned the CompStat program, and the CompStat program is a program that is one of the keys to turning New York City around. People ask me all the time, how did you do it? How did you take New York City from being the crime capital of America to being the safest large city in the country? How did you take it from being the welfare capital of America with 1.1 million people on welfare to 640,000 fewer people on welfare, and being the welfare to work capital of America? How did you take it from a deficit to a surplus, and all the things that were part of the turnaround in New York City? Well, there were a lot of components to it, and I didn't do it. A lot of people did it. A lot of people, some of whom are in this room, who work with me day in and day out, A lot of people, including the police officers who had to do the hard work of making the thousands and thousands of arrests. So there's no one thing that did it. But if there's one program that probably is at the core of it, it's the CompStat program. So I'm going to explain very briefly what the CompStat program is about and just suggest 2 or 3 ways in which the CompStat program could be applied to the problems that America faces right now. Because the thing that I heard most often as I traveled around the United States over the last 4 or 5 years, and I think I've been in most of the states in the last 4 or 5 years, and a number of them many, many times. And the thing that I would hear most often, even more sometimes than terrorism or Iraq or Afghanistan, was Washington doesn't work anymore. They don't seem to accomplish anything. They don't seem to be able to get anything done. And that used to be the complaint about New York City. Richard Schwartz will remember that. That used to be the complaint about New York, that we couldn't get things done. And the major change that we made in New York City that allowed New York City to go from a city that was described as unmanageable and ungovernable to a city that was described as the best example of urban renaissance in the country in Time magazine in 2000. The major change that we made was we thought about running New York City like a business. If New York City were a business and therefore were accountable, how would you deal with it? And that led us in part to the CompStat program. The CompStat program was developed by the police department. It was developed by then Commissioner Bratton, now the chief of police in Los Angeles, and Jack Maple, and a large group of people. It was a frustration that I had going back 20 years. When I was in the Justice Department, both times that I was in the Justice Department in Washington, I had responsibility for putting out the FBI crime statistics. And the FBI crime statistics used to come out usually 3 or 4 months after the year was over. So you would put out all these statistics about all these cities, and the cities would report, number 1 for murder, number 1 for burglary, number 1 for rape, number 1 for overall crime, number 10, number 20, number 150. And I used to feel this frustration that what good does it do now, 3 or 4 months later, to say that last year was a really bad year for New York or for Atlanta or for Miami or wherever? Wouldn't it be something if you could take these statistics and kind of use them as a tool to reduce them while the year was going on? Well, then when I became mayor and we met with Bill Bratton and Jack Maple really originated the CompStat program. And I met with Bill Bratton yesterday, and we reminisced about this. But he used to actually keep the crime statistics on napkins that he took from restaurants. Jack, who has passed on tragically, Jack used to love to eat. And he used to carry around these napkins, and he would list all the crime statistics for the transit precincts on napkins. 4 robberies that night, 6 burglaries, 10 muggings. And then he'd have the number of the precinct on it. And then he'd go analyze them, and he tried to figure out which ones were doing a good job, which ones were doing a bad job. Well, you take all that, wanting to use crime statistics as a management tool. Jack's system, which was a really, really good system in a smaller context, the transit police, and then you put it into the think tank of the New York City Police Department, which is an unbelievably great law enforcement organization, and what emerged was CompStat. You can take the CompStat principles and apply them to almost any agency of government. We eventually did in New York City, and you can do it with the federal government. And I'm going to show you sort of briefly, how you do that. That's what CompStat accomplished, along with broken windows, along with the 40,000 police officers, along with several other things. But that's overall what CompStat accomplished. That's what New York City was like in 1993. We had 1,946 murders. We had 1.1 million people on welfare. We had a $2.3 billion budget deficit. And almost 60% of New Yorkers said they would like to leave the city if they had a chance. That is the most distressing percentage of all. Now, this is what CompStat is all about: accurate and timely intelligence, effective tactics, rapid deployment of personnel and resources, and relentless follow-up and assessment. The key to CompStat is not only deciding what the measure of success is going to be and measuring it every day on those little napkins and then ultimately in a computer, but the key to it is relentless follow-up and assessment, having a CompStat meeting every week. Because very often in businesses or in governments, all these statistics are created, and people take them and they put them in their drawer, and 6 months later they look at the statistics. The innovation that CompStat brought about was it required everyone to confront the statistics every week. A week would not go by before you got a look at, were you moving toward your goal of eliminating or reducing crime, or were you moving away from your goal, and therefore, what should be done about it? Well, here's what happened as a result of a CompStat meeting every week, relentlessly, week after week, month after month, year after year. 56% decline in overall crime, a 73% decline in motor vehicle theft, a 67% decline in robbery, a 66% decline in murder. This is way beyond what happened in the nation during this period of time. There was a point at which, and Bill and I talked about this yesterday, there was a point at which the entire crime decline in the United States was based only on New York. Actually, Bob Dole made that point in a debate with then President Clinton in 1996. But even as you look back on it now, the crime decline in the United States would be fairly small if it wasn't for the crime decline in New York City. And New York City is the only city that I can think of that has continued that crime decline to this day, because New York City is still using CompStat, and Commissioner Kelly and Mayor Bloomberg have improved it, as Bill Bratton has in Los Angeles. And I got a chance to look at the CompStat program in Los Angeles yesterday, and it is, better, more intense, measures more things, has incorporated a terror stat program into it, or is attempting to do that, which should be done, by the way, for the United States government. Then we took the CompStat program and we applied it to a number of other city agencies, and it worked as well or even better in some of those other city agencies. The Health Stat program enrolled over 150,000 children in health care. That was only an 18-month program. It used a CompStat approach of measuring, relentlessly following up, pin mapping. The TEAMS program in the Corrections Department, which also won, I think, the Kennedy School Award for Innovations in Government, might arguably have been more successful even than the CompStat program. It reduced violence on Rikers Island and in New York City jails by 95%. It's actually true. Hard to believe that you can reduce anything by 90 or 95%, but it did. And the big picture, like the big picture for the city was, but before I came into office, 60 Minutes had done a piece on Rikers Island being the most dangerous jail in America. By the time the TEAMS program got finished with Rikers Island, 60 Minutes did a piece on Rikers Island being one of the safest jails in the entire country and a model of how to run a jail. And then the JobStat program, which is the one that may have the biggest long-term impact on the city, the JobStat program was an attempt to take CompStat and apply it to welfare, to measure the success of our welfare agency based on the number of jobs they found for people, not the number of people they put on welfare. Because after all, that's what success is. Success in a person's life is not being on welfare, it's having a job. So the idea of CompStat is you've got to figure out what an agency is supposed to achieve, and then you have to figure out the measurement, the ultimate measurement of it, and then you have to figure out the measurements that come before it that predict it. And as a result of the TEAMS program, something happened that nobody at all thought was possible. 640,000 fewer people on welfare from the day it started until the day I left office, and I think that number hopefully is continuing. These are the things that were said about it. The single most organizational, administrative innovation in policing during the latter half of the 20th century. The Kennedy School of Government awarded CompStat the 1996 Innovations in Government Award. Now, this is what we should apply to the federal government. In order to satisfy the complaints and the criticisms of the people who say Washington doesn't accomplish anything, the concept must be, and if I were president, this is the way I would do it, and we're going to begin organizing it now, because we began organizing what we were going to do in New York City 18 months before. We've got to look at each one of the functions of the federal government and impose business-like standards on it, CompStat standards on it. For example, big discussion right now about border security. There should be a border stat program. The border stat program should measure the number of people coming over the border. The border stat program should try to attempt how many people are coming over the border that are undetected. As the government rolls out its high technology program, I think it's called SBI Net. As the government rolls that out, the technology is going to be there to figure out how many people are coming over that are undetected. That should be recorded every day, every night. It should be examined every single morning. And you should look at it and see how successful you're being in stopping people from coming over the border. You can then take that and pin map it. And you put it on a map like we did in New York City, like they do in Los Angeles, like they do it in the other cities that use the CompStat program. Pin map it. Are they coming over the border equally at all places? Hardly. What are the places where they're coming over in greater numbers? What are the places that they figured out that we're not patrolling that they're coming over, so we move more patrols there, we move more people there? The BorderStat program can bring about what we desperately need, which is control of our borders. One of the reasons that I object to the current legislation that is before the Congress now is that the current legislation has no organizing purpose, and it could arguably make things worse given the chaotic way in which it was put together. It was essentially put together by committees that cobbled together different compromises. And when you look at the compromises, it's hard to tell. In each one of them, each one of the categories, it's hard to tell, are things going to be better or worse? Is the guest worker program going to be so complicated that it's worse than what is happening now and people will evade it, for example? How can you know who's in the United States when you don't have a measure in there for determining who's going to leave the United States? If you don't know who's left, then you really don't know who's here. And the reality is we have the technology now to accomplish that. We have the technology to accomplish what should be the goal of immigration reform. And I urge Congress to change it, because then I could see supporting it. What they should change it to is we should know everyone who's in the United States. That should be the goal of the United States government from a foreign country. Everyone that's here should be known. It should be in a database. We should know their address. We should know who they are. We should know something about their background. And we should know the work that they're doing. And then they should all have a tamper-proof ID card that's biometric. Then we could, if we could accomplish that, and with a BorderStat added to that, we could accomplish that, because we could then also determine what are the percentage that we're off 100% compliance, and then we could get to compliance. And then if we did that, we could focus our attention on the people who don't have cards, the people who don't come forward, the people who are hiding, because that's where the terrorists are going to be, and that's where the drug dealers are going to be. And BorderStat can help us both get control of the people coming over the border and make us a lot more secure in being able to know who's in the United States and what can we do about it. You can take the CompStat program and you can apply it to TerraStat. It's a program that is being developed, something that's being developed in certain places in the country. It should be developed for the entire country. That is, trying to figure out what are the precursors that suggest that there's going to be a terrorist act, suspicious activity. We've had some very, very fortunate cases over the last couple of years in which, I think of the one in New Jersey recently, where the U.S. attorney in New Jersey for 16 months tracked those 6 people, 6 Islamic terrorists who were going to ultimately attack Fort Dix. That all started with an alert clerk in a store who was given a DVD that he had to copy. He became suspicious of it, and he went to the Mount Laurel Police Department. The Mount Laurel Police Department doesn't have the resources of the New York City Police Department, but they had an alert police officer and an alert staff, and they brought it to the Joint Terrorism Task Force, and then the Joint Terrorism Task Force investigated it for 16 months and prevented these people from killing what looked like would be the sentries at Fort Dix. Well, you can't count on that all the time. You need a system to track that. You need a system to make sure that we're getting all that information and we're getting the best use out of local law enforcement. As Louis knows from running the FBI is limited in resources. Local police are unlimited in resources, hundreds of thousands. Is it 700,000 local police? Something like that? 700,000 local police? They should be our eyes and ears, with the FBI helping to coordinate that, work with that, working with them. A TerraStat program can get that intelligence to the right places. A GapStat program can help us measure whether we're actually imposing fiscal discipline on the government. It's my promise that I would reduce the size of the federal employees. Something like 42% of them are retiring in the next 10 years. My objective would be to try to replace about half those positions. No one would lose their job, but the position wouldn't get filled. We would replace those positions with technology or with figuring out how people can be more productive. Well, you've got to track that. You have to have a GapStat program to track that and to track the out-of-control expenditures in each one of the agencies. So This isn't the time to go into great detail about it, but over the course of the next month or two, in each one of these areas, we're going to outline a different CompStat-like program, let's call it a FedStat program, that could be used to improve and vastly improve the performance of agencies as different as the State Department. I mean, think, what's the overall mission of the State Department? The overall mission of the State Department is, in a very, very elevated way, I don't mean to demean it in any way, in a very elevated way, to sell America. That's the purpose of it. We sent Benjamin Franklin to France, not just to explain the French to us, but to get their help in our revolution, to sell America to France. So you've got to measure the success of the State Department or the Defense Department, making the military more modern, a hybrid military, better able to handle the kinds of challenges that terrorism now imposes on it. We need a different model for our military than the Cold War model, which was a model that was geared toward nation-state war. Now we're looking at smaller but equally dangerous wars, and we're looking at the necessity sometimes of doing follow-up, nation building, and the things that are attached to that. So CompStat can help in all of these areas if you apply it. The major purpose of CompStat is accountability. It begins with the president. I have on my desk a sign that says, "I'm accountable," and it goes down to the FBI agent working a case, or the CIA agent trying to gain intelligence, or the soldier in Baghdad trying to impose order in a situation in which it's really important to us that we come out of Baghdad with order. Otherwise, this terrorism thing is going to be much more dangerous for us. So that's a quick outline of it, and we'll spend the rest of the summer explaining it in great detail and working on it and have it ready to go if we get elected president, and it will turn around the federal government just as well as it will turn around, as it turned around New York City. There's no reason why. Every place that has used these programs, including Los Angeles and many cities in the country, and now some foreign countries, have found them to be revolutionary in being able to turn governments into accountable, responsible organizations. Thank you. Questions?